Hey guys, guess what? I'm actually on time. I think I am. We're gonna see. We're gonna find out if I'm gonna deliver this on time. But so far, we're on course. So let's keep our fingers crossed because I know it's shocking that I'm even remotely on time. It's been a habit lately, but we're gonna fix it. Okay, so before we begin, this episode includes graphic details involving the murder of children and vulnerable adults. There's no gore for shock value, but some of what happened at Hinterkaifeck is hard to forget. Listener discretion is advised. A quiet farmhouse, a family, footsteps in the attic, but no prints leading away. Just one set coming in from the woods, and then nothing but silence, as if the forest itself exhaled and swallowed them whole. In 1922 Germany, something horrific unfolded between the wheat and the whispers, and no one ever figured out who or what did it. This is the story of Hinterkaifeck, the farmhouse where 6 people were murdered, and where the killer may have stayed to feed the animals afterward. Welcome back to Glow in the Dark, where beauty meets the bizarre, and silence can be deadly. I'm Destiny, part storyteller, part skeptic, full-time collector of cursed facts. Whether you found me through crime, curses, or cold cases, you've stepped into the strange side of beauty. Some mysteries come wrapped in blood, some are buried in folklore, but this one brought both and left a stain no one could ever clean. Let's set the scene. Germany, March 1922. Just a few years after the end of World War I, the country is wounded, economically, emotionally, spiritually. Cities still smell faintly of smoke and broken stone. And out in the countryside, it's even worse. Food is scarce. Neighbors are suspicious. Superstition and Catholic guilt run wild like dandelions in the field, and grief is practically a house guest. On the edge of a little Bavarian village called Grobern, just north of Munich, there sits a lonely farmstead. Not in the town, not even quite near it, about half a mile into the trees, tucked behind wheat and forest, down a dirt track that didn't even have a proper name. The locals didn't call it by the address. They called it Hinterkaifeck. Kaifleck was the name of a nearby hamlet, and Hinter meant behind. Behind Kaifleck, behind the village, behind the reach of help. The place didn't just feel far away. It was. Now, here's who lived there. Andreas Gruber, 63, gruff, bitter, and not well liked. Cecilia Gruber, 72, his wife, who was quiet and perhaps complicit. Victoria Gabrielle, 35, their daughter who was recently widowed. Victoria's 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia Jr. and little Joseph, who was just 2. And finally, Maria Baumgartner, a maid, who had just arrived. We'll get into Maria in a minute, but first, the family, and the secrets the house already held. Andreas Gruber wasn't just unliked, he was actively hated. Neighbors described him as controlling, cruel, and aggressive. He had a criminal record, charged with incest. Yes, with his own daughter Victoria. And somehow, they both ended up back under the same roof. In the twisted laws of small-town silence, shame didn't end the abuse. It just turned down the volume. And that 2-year-old child, Joseph? Some said he wasn't Victoria's late husband's son at all, but Andreas's. which would make that child a product of rape, a breathing reminder, and in that house, a living secret. The courts had found Andreas guilty of incest years earlier, but no one stopped him from returning to his home. And Victoria? Whether by trauma bond, coercion, or exhaustion, she stayed. She was known in the town as gentle, religious, beautiful. She sang in the church choir, and yet she lived behind locked doors with the man who hurt her. Andreas had control over the farm, the finances, the food. There were letters suggesting Victoria tried to escape and was pulled back. Whether physically or emotionally, we'll never know. But it's important to understand the violence that ended this story didn't come from nowhere. It walked in the front door a long time ago and never left. Now, let's talk about the house. The farmhouse itself was stone and wood, a single structure with both living quarters and a barn. Modest, old, and strangely boxed in. No plumbing, no electricity, no telephone. There was an attic that stretched across the top, narrow stairs, creaky floors, flickering lanterns. To get to the barn, you had to step outside, just a few feet through the dark, enough to feel alone. The farm was so isolated that you could scream your lungs out and no one would hear it. Or maybe they would. And still wait 4 days to come check. It was the kind of place where a door closing in the wind could sound like a sentence, and a house guest might not leave because they were never invited in the first place. Cecilia Sr., Andre's wife, was mostly quiet. There's no record of her ever standing up to him, but there's also no record of her helping Victoria. She might have been afraid. She might have looked away. Or maybe, just maybe, she believed it was none of her business. 7-year-old Cecilia Jr. was bright, observant, and very close to her mother. She likely knew when to stay quiet. She might have been born into fear and called it normal. And Joseph? Just a baby, too small to run, too innocent to know what kind of house he'd been born into. If a place ever needed cleansing, it was Hinterkaifeck. But instead of sage and prayer, what came next was something darker, something older, like the land itself had gotten tired of waiting. Then came the knock. Maria Baumgartner, age 44, the new maid. She'd arrived that very day. Her sister walked her to the door, the last person to see her alive. She was kind, hard-working, and nearly blind in one eye. She likely didn't even see what hit her. She didn't know the house's history, didn't know the last maid had quit in terror, didn't know the attic noises, or the newspaper that wasn't theirs, or the keys that had gone missing. She just needed a job. She laid down to rest and never got up again. 4 days before the murders, Andreas Gruber found something strange in the snow. Footprints. They came from the woods, walked directly towards the farmhouse, but didn't go back. Not a single step away. He told his neighbors, but no one believed him. They thought he was a drunk or being paranoid. He was always angry about something. Why not the footsteps? But here's the thing. He didn't just see the prints. He started hearing things. Attic footsteps, at night, pacing and shifting, moving just above their heads. They searched, but they didn't find anyone. Then the keys went missing. A newspaper appeared in the house, one they never subscribed to. No one knew where it came from. It just showed up. The family dog would growl at the stairs. The children were nervous. And Victoria? She stopped singing. When your attic starts whispering back, you stop being the homeowner. You're just the haunted. And then came the strangest resignation letter ever written. The previous maid, the one before Maria. She quit suddenly, without notice. She told the townspeople that she was terrified of the house, that something watched her, that she heard something breathing when no one else was home. Andreas didn't report that either, because in that house, fear was normal. Now, Let's pause here for a minute, because from a forensic behavioral standpoint, this is huge. Whoever may have been stalking this family, they were already inside. There's a theory that someone had been living in the attic for days, maybe even weeks, watching and waiting. That would explain the missing keys, the noises, the unfamiliar paper, the dog reacting, the tension that built like a pressure cooker. Imagine being such a red flag that even the ceiling starts pacing when you walk in. At some point, you don't need a ghost. You need a locksmith and a priest. Andreas, of course, didn't call the police. He didn't believe in them. He didn't trust anyone. Instead, he reinforced the locks. But it didn't matter. Whatever or whoever was in that attic, they weren't locked out. They were already locked in. March 31st, 1922, Good Friday. The day began like any other on the Gruber farm. Cold, quiet, routine. But the tension was building. The attic had gone silent. The dog wasn't barking. And the unease that had been circling for days, it was about to explode. That afternoon, Maria Baumgartner, the new maid, arrived with one suitcase. Her sister dropped her off at the door, making her the last outsider to see the Gruber family alive. She'd barely unpacked. By nightfall, the house would fall silent. So here's what we know, what we can reconstruct, and what we still can't explain. That night, one by one, members of the Gruber household were lured into the barn. Not all at once, one at a time. First Andreas, then Cecilia Sr., then Victoria, then 7-year-old Cecilia Jr. They left the warmth of the house, walked through the cold, into the dark barn, into death. No one knows how. Was there a sound? A cry for help? Did the killer call them by name? No one ran. No one screamed loud enough to raise alarms. And if they did, no one was close enough to hear. Inside the barn, the killer used a mattock. Yeah, I'm probably saying that wrong. Is it a mattock? Is it a mattock? I don't know, but there's 2 T's, and I'm from Texas. We all know I can't say these words. They really trip me up. Anyways, inside the barn, the killer used a mattock. For those unfamiliar, it's a farming tool, like a hybrid between an axe and a pick, designed to break up hard soil, blunt on one side, sharp on the other. It's not elegant, it's not efficient, but it's devastating. It crushes, it tears, it leaves behind impact trauma so severe it can shatter bone on contact. And that's exactly what it did. Autopsy reports later revealed multiple blunt force blows to the head, deep skull fractures, many victims had cranial collapse, facial bones pulverized, cheekbones and jaws caved in, wounds that extended from brow ridge to jawline, blood spatter so high up the wall it suggested that victims were standing and then dropped. Andreas was struck with such a force that part of his face was described as crushed inward. His zygomatic bone, the cheek, was shattered. His head was reportedly split open. Cecilia Sr., his wife, suffered deep gashes across her skull. One wound exposed her brain matter. Her autopsy noted that the brutality far exceeded what was necessary to kill. Victoria, their daughter, had 9 separate wounds to the head and face. Some were curved, matching the edge of the mattock. One reporter claimed that her skull was nearly split in half. But here's the most haunting part. None of the bodies were left where they fell. They were dragged and then stacked inside the barn, carefully, deliberately, covered in hay, like someone wanted to hide them or preserve them. Or maybe it was guilt, or ritual, or something even darker. And little Cecilia Jr.? She didn't die right away. She survived the first blow. Torn and terrified, she sat next to her dead mother and clawed at her own head, pulling out her hair in handfuls. Her hands were bloodied, her fingernails cracked, and she died hours later, curled beside Victoria. Let that sit. That's not folklore. That's a child, alone, in pain, screaming where no one could hear her. Meanwhile, inside the house, the killer wasn't finished. Maria, the maid, had just laid down in her room, fully dressed, still wearing her shoes. Her body was found lying diagonally across the bed. As if she just rested for a moment, the killer struck her in the head, likely while she was asleep or turning over. No signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, just silence. And then, Joseph, 2 years old, still in his crib. He never had a chance to cry out. A single crushing blow to the side of his head. Instant. And then, someone gently laid Victoria's dress over his body, folded, tucked, almost like an afterthought, or a twisted mercy. One by one, room by room, the house fell silent. But silence doesn't always mean peace. Not here. It took 4 days for anyone to check on the Grubers. That's how isolated Hinterkaifeck was. April 4th, 1922. Neighbors noticed that no one had been seen or heard from since Friday. The mail was piling up. The dog was tied outside. The chimney was cold. At least, that's what some said. Others swore they saw smoke from the chimney over the weekend. A few even walked past and claimed to hear movement inside the house. The truth? It's murky, but the evidence left behind tells its own story. When they reached the barn, what they found wasn't just disturbing, it was inhumane. 4 bodies, stacked carefully, one on top of the other like cordwood, covered with hay, as if someone wanted to hide them or preserve them. First, they found Andreas, then Cecilia Sr., then Victoria, then little Cecilia Jr., curled at her mother's side. None of them were recognizable. Their faces had been crushed, their skulls cracked open like rotten wood. The bodies weren't just dead, they were displayed. Whoever did this didn't panic. They took their time. Let's talk about what the autopsies revealed. Though to be clear, calling them autopsies is generous, because in a true forensic disaster, they were done in the barn, on the ground, in front of the villagers. No sterile tools, no proper documentation, just field doctors, saws, and hay dust. Andre's head was nearly split open, facial structure obliterated. One eye had popped from its socket due to pressure. Blood had pooled into the straw so deeply it stained the earth. Cecilia Sr. suffered deep gashes across her skull. Her face was fractured but less mangled than Andre's. But one blow was so forceful, it exposed parts of her brain matter. The medical reporter noted a ruptured cranial plate and cerebral damage. She may have died instantly, or within moments. Victoria was beaten beyond recognition. The side of her head had collapsed inward. One arm had clear defensive wounds, and her blouse was torn, leading to early speculation that she may have been attacked with additional motive. That theory was never proven, but it never really went away either. Little Cecilia Jr., her post-mortem report remains one of the most heartbreaking documents in German criminal history. She had a large gaping skull fracture, torn scalp and missing hair, open lesions along her forehead, signs of manual self-injury, including abrasions on her face and hands, dirt in her fingernails, likely from clawing at the ground in panic. She didn't die from the blow alone. She died from shock, blood loss, and terror. Forensic estimate? She lived for several hours after the attack. Alone in the barn, next to her mother, suffering, knowing. And as a mom of 2 girls, that part hit like a gut punch. She wasn't just hurt, she was aware. She sat in the dark, bleeding, next to the woman who brought her into this world, and no one came. Not just a case, Not just a murder, a child begging for help where no one could hear her. That's the part no one wants to picture, but we have to say it out loud, because silence let it happen once. It doesn't get to bury her too. In the house, Maria was found in her bed, still dressed, her shoes on. The sheets were stained but undisturbed. Her skull had been caved inward from a single crushing blow to the side of her head. No defensive wounds, no resistance, likely killed in her sleep or moments after lying down. Joseph was in his crib, covered with Victoria's dress, still in his baby clothes. The back of his skull had been crushed with a single direct strike, a wound consistent with vertical force. He was 2, still in his baby clothes, still in his crib, where he should have been safe. No school pictures, no birthday memories, just silence, and a dress covering his body. You can call this a massacre, you can call it a mystery, but let's be clear. This was the execution of a family, including a toddler who never had a chance. Now, here's where it gets worse. The heads, meaning the skulls, of all 6 victims were removed, cleaned, and sent to Munich to be examined by a psychic. Yes, a psychic. Germany's top police division, a Bavarian state criminal office, thought maybe, just maybe, a clairvoyant could sense the killer's identity by touching the skulls. They got nothing. And 2 years later, during World War II, the skulls were lost in a bombing raid, destroyed, gone. No DNA, no future analysis, just gone. So let's recap. No crime scene preservation, no official photography, no blood pattern analysis, no temperature-based time of death calculation, no chain of custody, and now, no skulls. Forensic science didn't just fail, it evaporated. And the murder weapon? Not found for weeks. When it finally turned up, it was buried beneath a trapdoor in the attic. Yes, the same attic where footsteps had been heard. The mattock, still crusted with dried blood, had been cleaned. Just barely, but not hidden well. Almost like someone wanted it to be found, eventually. But only after they were long gone. So, did the killer stay in the house? That's the part everyone whispers about, and it gets confusing because some neighbors said they saw no smoke, but others reported chimney smoke early on, around Saturday or Sunday. And that's not all. Here's what's confirmed. The oven had been used. Ashes were fresh and the stove was still warm. There were crumbs on the table and signs that someone had prepared food. The livestock had been fed and tended to. Their stalls were clean. The dog had been tied up, then let loose again, and then it was found in a different location. At least one bed had been slept in, rumpled sheets and fresh body impressions, and the kitchen knife rack had a blade missing, but no knife was used in the murders. So whether the killer stayed for a few hours or a couple days, they didn't flee the scene. They moved in, fed the animals, cooked a meal, slept in the house, used the family's things. Someone made themselves a home in the aftermath of a massacre. In forensic psychology, that's called comfort behavior. It's when the killer doesn't just kill. They linger. They revisit the scene, normalize it, claim it. Sometimes it's a ritual. Sometimes it's a compulsion. Sometimes it's a fantasy finally made real. But it's never accidental. You don't stay in a house full of corpses unless something inside you feels at home. We've seen this behavior in other cases. Edmund Kemper, who slept beside his mother's body. Richard Chase, who sipped orange juice in a house soaked with blood. Even Daniel LaPlante, who lived inside the walls of his victims' homes for days, just watching. But Hinterkaifeck was worse, because the killer didn't return to the scene. They never left. The beds were turned, the stove was warm, the animals were fed, and the killer ate their bread. This wasn't a getaway. It was a dark little honeymoon. Just him and the ghost. They didn't break in. They waited out the noise and became part of the silence. And then, when it was over, when the bodies were stacked like hay, when the house stopped screaming, they made themselves comfortable. That's not escape. That's ownership. We always say he, but what if it wasn't? What if the face behind this was someone no one would suspect? A neighbor, a woman, someone already inside. Sometimes horror doesn't knock. Sometimes it answers the door. So the question isn't, why did no one catch them? It's, what did they take with them when they left? Because it wasn't money. It wasn't heirlooms. It wasn't the murder weapon. What they took was the house. The killer didn't just end lives. They claimed the space, like they'd been waiting for the silence so they could move in. So let's unravel the theories. Who did this? Who was the suspect? The official ones, the whispered ones, the ones that make you check your attic before bed. Let's break them down. Lawrence Schlittenbauer, the neighbor. Schlittenbauer. Yes, that's a real last name. Don't worry. You only have to try saying it once. Unlike me, I had to nail that. That was work. I saw that and I was like, yeah, that's gonna mess me up. But Schlittenbauer, I think I got it. He'd once been involved with Victoria, claimed to be Joseph's father, and was part of the search party. But here's the twist. When they arrived, he walked right into the house, unlocking the door with ease. No hesitation, no shock. Some say he moved the bodies in the barn before the police could arrive, a detail that's still debated. You're either incredibly helpful or incredibly guilty. Pick a side, Lawrence. A vengeful stranger. Germany in 1922 was still crawling with soldiers, drifters, and the displaced. Some believe a transient may have taken shelter in the attic, waiting for the right moment to strike. It would explain the missing keys, the footsteps, and the newspaper that no one subscribed to. Enemies of Andreas. Let's be real. Andreas was not a man people liked. There were real accusations of incest and abuse. If someone wanted revenge, they wouldn't have to look hard for motive. The ghost husband, Carl Gabriel. Victoria was technically a widow. Her husband Carl was declared killed in World War I, but his body was never recovered. And some neighbors whispered, what if he never died? What if Carl came back, changed, disfigured, hollowed out by the war, and discovered his wife had a child, possibly fathered by her own father? What do you do with that kind of betrayal? Some say he snapped, that he returned in secret, that he watched from the woods until he was ready, that the wounds he gave weren't random, they were righteous in his mind. Not a stranger, not a thief, but a man who once shared Victoria's bed and chose the barn as her grave. No one ever confirmed it, but to this day, some believe Carl was the ghost that came home. The supernatural theory. This one's for the folklorists. A cursed house, ghostly lights, footprints that stopped in the snow. Some believe the land itself was tainted, and the murders were a ritual, or a possession, or something older than any investigation could name. A haunted house in the middle of nowhere, no suspects, and a crime scene colder than the weather? Germany's rural version of a horror movie, and no one left to roll the credits. What do you think? Who or what did it? Message me. I want your theory. The farm was demolished in 1923. No one wanted to live there, not even the ghosts. But the story lingered. Locals still whisper about the footsteps. Visitors still walk the woods. Some say you can hear the barn door creak on windless nights. The victims were buried in unmarked graves, and the killer? Never found. You don't linger at a murder scene unless you're feeding something besides animals. That's not survival. That's satisfaction. No justice, no closure. The Hinterkaifeck murders are a puzzle buried beneath decades of silence. But maybe silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's hiding something. Maybe the killer stayed. Maybe it wasn't a person who stayed. Maybe it was the house, growing teeth. Between the wheat and the whispers, something rooted itself, and it never left. So, attic footsteps, incest rumors, a killer who fed the cows after committing mass murder? Yeah, just another wholesome farmhouse story, the kind of place Zillow won't feature in their house with character list. But really, what do you think happened? Was it the neighbor? A vengeful squatter? A husband that maybe didn't die? Or did the house just get sick of everyone's family drama and handle things itself? Message me your theory. And while you're at it, follow, share, and hit that subscribe button like you're smashing a rusty barn door shut before something walks out of it. Every follow helps this podcast keep going and keeps the ghosts well fed. You don't want them hangry. Trust me. And hey, if you're new here, welcome to the weird. We do this kind of thing a lot. Until next time, stay haunted, stay strange, and maybe don't ignore those attic footsteps. They're never just the house settling. And most importantly, stay radiant, even in the dark.